Ronnie Landis coming to you here, and I wanted to share a very simple message, and I wanted to talk about trauma. And trauma is a word that's used quite a bit in the holistic healing world, and it's one that I'm intimately connected to. When it comes to trauma and how to heal trauma, this is a vast topic. There's so many different things we can look at and so many things we should look at. And in a lot of ways, it's a lifelong journey. And trauma can affect us in so many different ways, and there's different types of trauma that we should definitely be aware of when we're on a healing journey and we're looking to overcome certain habits that we might associate as addictions. And addiction, according to Dr. Gabor Mate, an addiction is never the problem. The addiction is an attempt to solve a problem. So from that perspective, we need to ask ourselves, okay, what is the underlying problem that is associated to this addiction habit that I've taken on, essentially as a strategy to cope and medicate a deeper issue? And that deeper issue is what we need to take a look at. We need to lift the hood of the car, so to speak, and look at the gears and the mechanism that is not working properly. And of course, this can go into a lot of different things. We could talk about brain chemistry. We could talk about physiological aspects, nutrition, supplementation, lifestyle. All these things are part and parcel to this topic of healing and overcoming trauma. And I'm going to talk a lot in future videos. I'm going to break this kind of thing down. But right now, I just want to talk about the basic idea of trauma. And trauma can affect us in different ways. It can affect us psychologically. It can affect us emotionally. It can definitely affect us spiritually and metaphysically. And of course, it affects us physiologically as well. Now, there's different forms of trauma. There's most common, there's childhood trauma. And childhood trauma can happen in all kinds of different scenarios, situations, experiences that we had experienced as a young child in our formative years when we didn't have the ability to process experiences that we had. And it can be something very extreme like sexual trauma. It can be some form of physical or emotional abuse. It can also be something as simple as what we call parental attachment wounds. That's a whole topic that I want to talk about in a future video. Attachment injuries, attachment wounds, and how that sets us up psychologically for relational patterns with the opposite sex or the same sex, same gender, whatever your sexual orientation is. It can set us up for relationship issues that play out in our adult years, but are essentially needs that we didn't get met from our parental figures, usually the son to a mother, the daughter to a father, that kind of thing. I'd love to go deeper into that later, but the point of the matter is just to say that in childhood, we develop what's called imprints. In this case, trauma imprints from emotional impacts that we had experienced at a very young age, and we didn't have a fully developed nervous system and brain to effectively process those experiences. So what ends up happening is those emotional impacts get stored in our physiology, and they get stored in our nervous system, and then they essentially become part of us. Those energetic imprints become incorporated into our neurophysiological makeup, and they show up in a spectrum of different ways. We don't have time to go into all of that, but if you're listening to this, you probably have a good idea of how that's showing up in your life. This is a lot of the work that I've been doing over the last 12 years. It started out specifically as a nutritionist, working with raw living foods, cleansing, detoxing, supplementation, herbalism, superfoods, all this kind of thing. As I went deeper into the healing arts, I started to get more into developmental psychology. I started to get more into the field of addiction, understanding why addictions form, how they insulate within our neural networks, and they become so challenging to override, right? And again, addiction in of itself is a whole other topic, which I'll go deeper into as well, and the dopamine system and how that plays into it. But again, just returning back to the point on trauma, trauma is a deep subject. And our world that we live in is set up in such a way, society is set up in such a way where most of us, if not all of us, have been affected by various forms of trauma, whether it's parental conditioning, it's societal conditioning, and the belief systems, the stories, and the self-judgments that we have adopted within ourselves that have created insecurities. And when I think of the word insecurity, I think of the word security. Energetically, what does that mean? It means that energetically within our body, we don't feel secure. So we feel insecure or we feel unstable energetically. And then, of course, the mind makes up all kinds of stories for why that is. I'm not good enough. I'm not good looking enough. I'm not articulate enough. I'm not charismatic enough. I'm not strong enough. I'm not smart enough. Whatever the story may be, but just understand the story is never the issue. It's a physiological response from our stress system, which usually puts us in either a fight, flight, or freeze state. And our stress response is our body's adaptation mechanism that's based in survival software. And that survival software is essentially what's called a trauma response. So one of the things that you want to become aware of is what is your type of trauma response or your stress response. When you get very stressed out and your operating system, your brain and your nervous system has lost capacity or resilience to deal with life, it usually shows up in either fight, flight, or freeze, or some kind of blending of the three. You want to be very aware of what that is for you, what that looks like for you, how that shows up for you, because that will give you an insight into how to actually heal that nervous system stress response pattern. And it will give you an insight into the trauma that has been laid out within your system. And then there's a lot of different strategies and tools on how to override the survival software program in your nervous system. And the key is actually learning how to regulate your nervous system, how to manage your energy, so that you can essentially transmute, you can transform those embedded software programs, that energetic imprint, and start to redirect that energy into something that's productive, it's healthy, and it's going to serve you in your healing and transformational process. So where to go with this? How do we transition from here, right? I think the first thing, again, is just understanding what trauma is. Trauma it's a disconnect within the body itself. So the antidote for trauma is always about getting into your body. It's about being fully embodied in your physical body. If you try to address the trauma from the mind, you're going to be dealing with stories. You're going to be dealing with belief systems. And you can actually recirculate traumatic events by retelling the story over and over and over again and backtracking and getting stuck in time. That's an entire video in of itself, which I'll probably talk about, and how dopamine actually controls our perception of time. And when we've experienced an emotional impact at a young age that was never healed and resolved and integrated, essentially what happens is that there is a part of us, you could say a part of our inner child, that is stuck in time, that is emotionally undeveloped, and is playing out coping and compensatory patterns, particularly in romantic relationships. If we're talking about like an attachment injury, for example, an attachment wound, we play out these patterns as a way for the subconscious to become conscious and to heal an unresolved emotional impact. But of course, we don't know this. We don't know that this is what's going on. So if we're not aware of it, we run the risk of repeating these patterns over and over and over, and there's no guarantee that it's ever going to become conscious unless we have the right tools and the right information and the right strategy, and also the deep conviction and willingness to actually heal and transform these emotional imprints so that we can become a fully integrated, fully developed, and fully embodied human being as an adult. Essentially, where the child and the adult have to become one, so you don't have a runaway inner child that's essentially triggering the fight, flight, or freeze response. That's a whole deep metaphysical topic in of itself, one that I'll love to get into in a different video. I suppose in this video, I'm kind of just laying out an overview. I'm kind of just sharing an idea or a set of ideas and things to think about, things to meditate on, things to feel into inside of your own body. But what I can offer you is that ultimately this comes down to becoming embodied in your body. And if you don't feel safe in your physical body, it's going to be very hard to find what I call the home frequency within your own body. When you learn to stabilize and regulate your nervous system through breath work, through cold ice bath or cold shower therapy, through nutrition, dietary approaches, through physical fitness, movement practices, yoga, getting in touch with nature, balancing out your sleep cycles, engaging in healthy relationships that are reciprocal and equanimitous. These are all essential components of becoming a fully developed and embodied, integrated, healthy human being. And the first thing is we have to identify, what is our stress response like? Do we fight, do we flight, or do we freeze? Do we get overwhelmed? Do we get agitated? Do we get impatient? Do we lock up and contract? All these different things. We have to identify what that is for us. And then from there, more things in our consciousness start to open up. We have more information to work with. And from there, once you have that information, you'll know what the best tools for you really are. One thing I want to share with you is that no matter what it is that you're dealing with, one of the great things that you can do is engage in what's called the dopamine reset process. I've done a number of videos, and I will do a lot more videos to explain how this works and to explain the dopaminergic influence in all aspects of our human experience, particularly how it plays out in our nervous system, how it's related to trauma, and how it's also related to addictions and the healing and overcoming of addiction, which is also the pathway for healing and overcoming trauma as well. They're built in together. They're interwoven together. They're one and the same in many respects. So I do want to encourage you to consider doing a really well thought out dopamine reset. And it just so happens that I have created a 30-day dopamine reset. I call it the 30-day ultimate dopamine reset, and it's a program to reboot your life. I won't go deep into all that, but in the comments or the description below, there is a link to the website for the ultimate 30-day dopamine reset. And there's 30 unique videos that really go into this in detail. When you go through these videos, it will take you on a deep dive exploration into all these topics. You will have so much information that you never heard before. You most likely have never heard before. You may not have considered, but when you hear it, it will trigger something in your awareness. And there's incredible practical tools and strategies to support you in this process. There's also a 30-day dopamine reset protocol. So if you're struggling with coffee, stimulation, caffeine, tobacco, cigarettes, cannabis, maybe it's pornography, masturbation, some form of sex addiction, maybe it's social media addiction, being stuck to your phone and getting the dopamine hit from like constantly scrolling, procrastination, lack of motivation, lack of brain power and cognitive focus, all those things. Those can all be remediated through doing a dopamine reset. So I'd love to encourage you to check that out and potentially be part of that program. as potentially the most effective way to overcome the issues that I'm loosely articulating right now. So that information is in the description below. And I think that's it. That's all I wanted to share right here in this video. And we're going to do more videos on all these subjects. I'm going to break this stuff down into more detail. I'm going to talk a lot about trauma and the different forms of trauma, different perspectives and angles on trauma, as well as addiction, as well as dopamine, and many other topics that I think you're going to find really interesting and that I've been really integrating over the last few years at a very deep level. And I'm really excited to be able to share all of this with all of you on this YouTube channel, my podcast, social media, and all the like. All right, well, I hope this was useful. I hope this gave you something that you can use and gave maybe more of an expanded awareness of the subject of trauma. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Much love.